All right, I'm coming back tonight for a quick video on Nelly's workflow videos just because I wanted to make sure I covered all the process videos. I appreciate everybody who gave me a process video because I think those are super interesting to look at and provide a lot of insight, hopefully. I think they have anyway. So your notes included workflow videos meant to combine, recorded in a crappy format. It's cool. MKV is actually fine, I think. Let me see. Frustrated because you have to go back and fix things and go back. Getting frustrated with everything being as a separate subtool. Okay, so yeah, let me see. I think there's some stuff I noticed in this one, and actually, so I talked about this on Tuesday, but I wanted to go back and just talk a little bit more about what is the purpose of a retopo, because from the workflow, I feel like maybe you don't have a great idea of that right now. But anyway, so the idea is a high poly model, and actually this needs to be smooth. I'm not sure why it's not, but that might take longer. Oh, no, it's cool. Okay, smoothed. All right, so the high poly model typically has, all the detail that you would want to put on a model. And I have decimated this one, so it's actually lost a lot. It's actually not, some parts of it are not that high. Some of it is pretty high, like this arm here. But anyway, typically a high poly would be higher than this. I just sort of decimated maybe too much, but regardless, so it's got a lot of detail that you want, and what you want to do at the end of the day with your high poly is bake it down for a game workflow, and sometimes even for an animation workflow in a slightly different way. But you bake down maps from this onto the retopologized low poly, and the retopologized low poly, the purpose of this is to be obviously low poly enough that you can mess with it. You can render it in a game in real time, or if you're doing like an animation, feature animation or TV or whatever, you want it to be low enough that an animator can work with it in Maya and pose it and not have their computer slow down. So that's what it's for, and it's you can take it back into ZBrush and continue sculpting on it, but and sometimes retopologizing it can help with your geometry in ZBrush to make it easier to sculpt additional detail on it. But that's not really the main purpose of a retopo. The main purpose of retopo is to get your clean mesh that's low poly, and it's designed to have good edge loops that will help you rig it for animation. That's what it's for. So I think when you are going back in here and sort of, it looks like you're sort of moving the vertices on the low poly and then jumping up to your high poly and jumping back down and back and forth. That's not really the going back up to a subdivision 2 and then whatever. I see you doing that a lot here, and I don't think that's really something you should be doing, because it's not really, it looks like it's maybe causing more problems with your sculpt, and it's not really helping you, I don't think. So this is not something you want to do. You want to have your, go back to the sculpt. You want to have your sculpt pretty much nailed down before you start retopologizing. And then once it's ready, then you go in and you build on top of that your retopology. And that typically you would do in Maya, but you can also do it in ZBrush if you have a really good understanding of ZModeler and how ZBrush handles low poly geometry. But if you don't, then Maya's usually better. But anyway, so you want to go in and just basically have this perfectly fit to the shape of the high poly as much as you can. It's really important to try to match the silhouette. So if I go to unlit mode, you'll see that the silhouette of this is not super different from the silhouette of the low poly. The only places where the low poly is sort of losing silhouette information is on the wrinkles on the sleeves and stuff. But that was something I was okay with losing because I didn't think it was super important to the silhouette of the character. So you want to have a lot of control with your retopo, because when you're baking, you want the low poly retopo to match the high poly as closely as possible. The more they differ from each other, the more problems your bake is going to have, and the less like convincing it's going to look in the final result. So that's another reason why you don't necessarily want to go back and sculpt more after you've done your low poly, because then you're going to be taking it farther away. Or if you do it all in ZBrush as one mesh, then you're going to be having things just sort of get out of whack, and you're going to lose your edge flow. You're going to lose things that you did in Maya, which is not ideal. So that's sort of what a retopo should be for, and why, like, yeah, when I see you in here sort of moving vertices around, there's no real reason for you to have to do that this way. There's definitely better ways. And if you're trying to still adjust the shape of the face, like, that's something that should, like, getting the shape of the face right is what should happen first in your ZBrush sculpt. So, like, that's actually really important as well. Ignore if we move off the subject of retopos for a while and just talk about ZBrush. You want to start with a low res subdivision, right? And you want to get the shape of that as good as you can before you subdivide. You don't want to have subdivided a bunch and added a bunch of detail and then go back down to subdivision 1 and still be trying to change the basic shape, because that's sort of doing things out of order. You want to start and get the big shapes perfect or as close as you can, and once you've done that, you then graduate to the next subdivision level and add more detail and get those shapes as good as you can, and then you subdivide again. And you don't want to have a bunch of sculpted detail at a high level and then come back down to your first level and still be sort of making changes to fundamental geometry, because that's just it's gonna cause a lot of problems. As you can see, I think, like, each time you move a vert in the subdivision 1, it gets things sort of out of whack in the higher level sculpt. And it looks like in a lot of this video, that's sort of what you're doing, is trying to make these changes at the low level, and then it's causing geometry errors in the high level sculpt. And that's just because, like, this isn't really how this is meant to be done. You want to do low level first. I'm being super repetitive, sorry. You want to do your low level subdivisions first, finish them, just be like, okay, I'm not touching this again, and then you go up and start adding detail. And if you use that process, I don't think you should have so many issues with, like, weird geometry and things getting out of control here. In addition to that, I would say you're using the move brush a lot, and I would avoid that. Instead of trying to use the move brush to sort of control your shapes, you should be, like, sculpting more. As I was talking about, I think a couple weeks ago, what I'd love to see is for you guys to be using mostly like a clay buildup or clay brush to build up forms, and then use the trim dynamic to chop them back down and get your planes of the shape and sort of get the basic forms before you go in and start sculpting detail and whatnot. I think trying to do this much work with the move brush, the problem with the move brush is it has like this wide fall off where it moves the part in the middle a little bit, it moves the outer parts less, and you just don't have a lot of control over what it's doing unless you have a huge move brush and you're just trying to slightly adjust something to the side or whatever. If you're doing it sort of a small to medium scale, the move brush is going to just make everything look sort of wiggly, like the pinky finger you have here, and that's obviously not what you want. So I would try to avoid sculpting this way. Like, don't try to use the smooth tool as little as you can, use the move brush as little as you can, try to focus on, clay buildup and trim dynamic. I think I see them in your shelf, in your quick pick, so I see you are using them, but I would try to use them more and try not to smooth out errors unless, like, because it seems like you're going down to subdivision 1, messing with it, and then coming back up, and it's caused errors which you then smooth out, which sort of leaves you back where you started. So like, yeah, I would try to sculpt in the correct order of subdivision levels, and then come back, and that's when you do your retopo. Once your sculpt is super good and nailed down, you don't want to retopo with a bad sculpt and then come back and try to fix the sculpt later. That's just going to it's just going to make it harder for you to succeed. So I would try to avoid that. Let me look at my notes on this. As far as the retopo itself, let me actually pause real quick. Okay, coming back. So just looking at your low poly here, I think so. I think there's things. It's not super messed up or anything. I think your topology on the body's all right, but your distribution of your polygons could use a lot of work here, because you want to use polygons in places where they are doing work for you. And what I mean by that is, usually are they like affecting the silhouette and helping you get curves and shapes that you need for the character, right? So like, having the pop here from the arm, is good. But if you go up to like the hat, obviously maybe this hasn't been retopoed yet, but obviously you can see the shapes are somewhat complicated up here, but they're not complicated enough to use 30,000 polygons or whatever this is. That's just, it's just wasteful. And then, same goes for the earring. Like, you have so many polygons on this tiny earring, but you have not enough on the ear. Because think about how big things are going to be on the screen and how round they should be versus how round your model is. You're always compromising between, not using too many polygons and getting the shape you want, but you can spend these polygons carefully and use them where they will give you the most results. Here's something you really want to watch out for. You have things going through each other, and maybe that's because you were modeling with the 3 key turned on, which is something you should never do. There's a flipped normals video about why you should never model with the 3 key on, so I won't talk about it at great length here, but I'll link it in the description. But you want to be modeling with 3 key turned off, because otherwise you're going to get stuff like this where the underlying mesh is just super messy. But that's the other thing with a retopo. Like, a retopo is never going to be a 3-keyed model unless you're doing like a Disney movie or something. If you're doing a game mesh or whatever, like, this is all you're going to get at the end of the day. So you want to make sure this looks good. So yeah, like, there's a lot of inconsistency with how many polygons you're using. Like, this hair, I guess, is very, very low poly. This chain is very high. The sort of whatever this is it's not, this part isn't bad, but it's much higher than like the body underneath it, right? And you want consistency there. It doesn't have to all be like exactly equal, but it should be like a consistent level of shapes. And right now this all looks very blocky, whereas you have like high detail here on the hat. You have, this is pretty good. It could be cleaner, but it's not super bad. There's some stuff, again, like interpenetrating here. I don't know if this was because you were working 3-keyed or whatever, but like, pay attention to this stuff. You don't want your model to be so deformed. Let me see, but then if you look at the handle, like, obviously way too much polygon density on this wrap. This could almost be a pretty simple cylinder with just a couple of edge loops to capture this shape, and the rest you would end up baking down to a normal map. So none of this you really need in your low poly. In fact, almost deleting that would be a better idea. Not specifically, but so there's a lot you can do when you do your retopo, your final retopo, where you want to, like, instead of using, because you have a budget, I forget how many polygons Tom said you could use, but you want to not be spending them all on something like this. You want to be spending them on, the head and the body and the places where it's going to make a difference, like these obliques are like, 2 polygons. You could bring shape into here. You could bring them into, I think there's additional detail with clothing and armor. You could do a lot more detail on like the shin thing, and and the wrist guards, and whatever this vest thing is. Like, there's a lot of opportunities for you to add detail, and you can get the budget of polygons for those from the hat. You don't need this many polygons for these eyes, for the handle, all that stuff. So try to spend your polygons carefully and in places where they're going to make a difference. This is super weird to me, the way that so I'm going to hide this. The arms are like not connected to the torso, and they're like interpenetrating. Not sure what's happening there. You want to be pretty careful about this stuff. Your retopo should be very clean. Your sculpt can be a little bit messy usually, but your retopo needs to be, all connected and correct. I talked about that on Tuesday too, a little bit, and how you want to set up your retopology. You don't want to have a bunch of like just sort of junky pieces sticking through each other. This doesn't have 2 sides, I think. No, it does, but like, does it? No, this is a one-sided thing. Like, that's not, you can't really do that for a game mesh unless you're making hair or something that's supposed to be completely flat, like paper maybe. So that doesn't make a ton of sense, especially because it's like floating outside. And maybe some of this stuff is work in progress that you're not actually finished with yet, which is fine. But I'm just trying to call things out in case they're not work in progress, I guess. Those would be the things I would look at first. Is first, your sculpting process, I think, needs work. I think you need to go back and, once again, start from your lowest levels and sculpt that up, go to the next one, sculpt that up, and not be going from subdivision level 1 to subdivision level 2 or 3 or 4, because that's not like correct procedure. And I think that's causing a lot of the problems that are making you frustrated with this sculpt. So that's one thing. And then, there's a lot you can do with your retopology to make this cleaner and work better. There's also a bunch of stuff I said in the Tuesday video that applies to what you're doing here that will hopefully be helpful. And then going back to your sculpting, I think you talked about not being a fan of how many subtools you have going on right now. I think your number of subtools is fine. I think what seems like an issue is you're not spending very much time on each thing. I keep seeing you in this video sort of, you'll do a really rough, quick attempt at something, like making this, this boot thing. And then you'll just sort of, you smooth it out or whatever. And then you just move on to something else, like up here. And what I'd like to see more is like really take the time to make it clean. Like, you've moved on to the shin guard, but like the foot is still super fucked up. Like, the shape of the edge is all like, if you look at where the shape of that thing on the concept art, it's pretty clean, it's pretty straight and round. I know my cursor is like invisible in these recordings, but I'm pointing at her foot on the right hand side in the concept art. Like, that area where the shin guard is out on the foot, like it's pretty straight and smooth. Like, and if you look at the one on yours, it's all messed up, but you've sort of moved on to the next thing you want to do. And I think that maybe part of your frustration with the number of subtools is that you are switching between subtools a lot. And maybe, I think your number of subtools, like I said, is actually not bad, but like, you might not be so impatient with the number of subtools if you were just taking more time on each one, because I think they all need a lot more sort of dedicated attention. Because I would imagine you're probably sort of cycling through them and coming back to each one, a little bit at a time. But like, try to spend more time on each one, because I think that would really help. And the other thing is, like, I can't read your mind, so I might be I might be off base on this, but it feels like you want to really have an image in your head of the shape that you want to make, and then you spend time working the sculpt towards that shape and get it as close as you can. Because I think what it looks like a lot of the time in this video is you will sort of lay down a bit of sculpting or, a block shape, and then you'll just sort of take it as it is and move on to something else. You know what I mean? And like, don't accept like your first result. Try to keep working it and try to get it closer to the concept or closer to what you have in your head, because there's enough time. Like, actually, so if I pause here, maybe I can use the snipping tool for this, since I can draw on this. All right, so if I look at the knee pad here, what I'm seeing here is like it's sort of a seashell shape where these pieces are all meeting at one central point, and they're sort of fanning out. Sorry, drawing with the mouse again, but they're all sort of meeting in the same spot, more or less. Not exactly, but they've definitely got a point of convergence. Whereas the one you're drawing over here, you have them sort of all the same shape and offset from each other, sort of like more like this. You know what I mean? And I think that's sort of just an issue of, you need to observe the shape very closely and try to figure out, how is my shape different from the one that I'm trying to make, right? Because I think this is a good example, because I see a lot of this throughout the video, but this is a really particularly good example that's easy to show. Because you don't want these all to be separate. You want them all to fan out the way the drawing is. And so, that's just sort of a matter of observation. So try to observe really carefully and try to spend more time on each part of the model in terms of bringing it towards the correct shape, So that's what I would say. And I think if you work with a more correct sculpting workflow and don't switch between low and high subdivision levels a lot, that might actually lead your work to be less frustrating, and maybe it'll be easier for you to spend more time on each individual piece. So that's hopefully helpful. I think that's the main stuff that I saw looking through these. Once again, like, special thanks for taking the time to record this. I know this probably took a long time and was a pain in the ass, so it's taken me many tries to get my video recording process clean and easy. It's still kind of hard, but so yeah, that's that. I guess like here's another thing. I think there's a lot of little workflow things that could be better. Like, you're using a super blocky low res mesh to try to lay down a high res strip on here, and that doesn't really make sense because the strip is round and high res, and your leg is blocky, so of course it's going to intersect. It's not going to match up correctly, and there's no real way you can get a high res round thing to fit over a leg that's this blocky. So try to work for your sculpt. This is going back to the retopo and high res thing. You want to get your sculpt all done with all the clothes, all the armor pieces. Like, have that all done in a high resolution for your final sculpt, and then go do your retopo. Then go make this, because once you have a good solid sculpt, it'll be much easier for you to say, like, oh, well, that strip around the leg, that doesn't stick out enough. That's not a silhouette breaking piece of clothing, so I don't have to model that. I can just skip that and make the leg the way it is, And then when you finally go and bake down your normal map and your AO and all that stuff, then it'll look relatively good. So yeah, I hope this was all pretty clear. I know I sort of went off the cuff a lot here, so if you have any questions, like, feel free to email me, message me, or whatever. I'd be happy to like elaborate on what I'm saying here. I think, I can see you're doing a lot of work. I think fixing some of these workflow issues will probably hopefully make it a lot less frustrating. So yeah, let me know if you have questions about this stuff or, whatever. And good luck. This is, come a long way, and I think it has a lot of potential still to go. So yeah, I'm excited to see where you go from here. Thanks for sending in the video.